Thank you very much, Lee. It's a pleasure to be here, see a nice full house. So I can't really say that my presentation is about nutrition, but it is about a couple of things that are very much on the agenda and have been occupying the TBA Veterinary Committee quite extensively over the last year. And I'd like to try and bring you up to date with what's been happening and a little bit about performance profiling, which is sort of very much coming and going to be in the future. You'll all be aware that BHA has put down this new rule about anabolic steroids, and although it was supposed to come in on the 1st of January, they actually postponed it a little bit to affect all foals born after the 1st of March. So things born before that, it doesn't relate to. And also it doesn't relate to horses that are retired. So it doesn't affect your mares or your stallions or anything that's officially come out of racing. And although they put this, a horse may not have an anabolic steroid throughout its life, this does not apply to retired horses. And the penalties they put in there is that if it's found to have had a steroid, it will be banned for 14 months from the time that it had it. So if it should be found in training and proved to have actually had the medicine as a foal, then it would have already completed its ban, if you can understand that. And there'll be a bit more about that. And to sort of tighten up on that, they've put that all GB horses must be registered within 12 months, and normally we do our foals blood test and ident at a month or so, and then they're going to reduce that to 6 months by 2 years' time so that they get them registered. And anything that's permanently imported must be registered in the same way within 3 months of its arrival. Similarly, horses imported from Ireland, France and Germany are affected, which have spent 12 months here, will be exempt. And anything that's going to run in Britain must be here a minimum of 10 days before its race, because that will allow time for sampling and results. These rules apply to anything foaled after the 1st of March this year, and registered, foaled in Ireland, registered and present in Great Britain. Anything permanently imported into Britain to be trained here, or anything otherwise present here for training or racing. So they put this big umbrella to affect anything that's racing here. These rules will apply to any licensed or permitted trainer and their personnel, any owner when the horse is actually not with a trainer, any trainer from outside Great Britain entering a horse to race here, and anyone else bound by these rules. So it's a pretty big catch-all. And up until now, obviously the BHA have not had authority over breeders or people other than trainers. So it's a big extension of their influence and regulation. And to try to define this before a horse goes into training, they need a name to pinpoint should there be a breach of the rules. So they call this person the responsible person. And this is defined as the trainer or registered owner, and deemed to be the breeder if it's not already registered. So that's why they're bringing forward the registration, because obviously prior to registration, nobody's declared themselves to be the owner of that horse, and they're determined to have a name of somebody that they can go to should there be a breach that's happened. So I've just put there that this is the first time the BHA are extending their authority to the breeding industry, and this does have connotations for all. And when you register your foal, and it has a blood test for its ident done, usually, as I say, a month or two old, there is a new declaration on that form you have to sign as a breeder, that you will be bound by the rules of racing, and that you can confirm that it's not been administered or ingested any prohibitive substances. Well, obviously it's very easy for us to sign that. We know what our foals have had, and we can assume we know what they've had even if they're away boarding, and we trust everyone on that sort of thing. But it does mean that we are signing that we are going to be bound by the rules of racing. And if anyone's actually studied the rules of racing, they take a bit of reading through, and you'd soon lose the will to live trying to read the whole lot. So your TBA board is currently negotiating with the BHA because we don't really want to get breeders to sign up to every rule of racing that there is, which was the BHA's intention when they put this. And quite good ongoing dialogue is being had between the TBA and the BHA about restricting this declaration to prohibitive substances and not another sort of raft of other racing rules that really don't apply to breeders, and it's not necessary for us to sign up to, at least at this stage. So we're hoping that by next year's registrations, it'll be a simplified thing that breeders are signing up to, and that you won't have worries on that score what you're signing. You certainly won't be able to read all the small print, but pretty good work is being negotiated out so that it's limited to what you're actually signing up to. There's a slide mentioning that. I'm sure you all know what anabolic steroids are, and they are synthetic substances similar to male sex hormones, promoting growth of skeletal muscle, development of male sexual characteristics. What do? Increase appetite, increase in musculature, include some hormones, and at the moment they are detectable in the bloodstream for up to 3 months if you use a blood test. What about the hormones that we use for stud medicine? Obviously, on studs, our mares are retired and we don't have to worry about it. But we do cover a number of fillies in training, and can we use these things? Well, although Regumate is, in essence, an anabolic steroid, the BHA have decided for the purpose of this, it is not so. So if we are covering fillies during racing, it can be used, obviously not close to a race, but it actually can be used during training if needed. And also the hormones that we currently use to help get fillies and mares pregnant, LH, GnRH and oxytocin, we are allowed to use those in fillies in training if we are covering fillies while they are in training. So we have got exemptions on those for covering fillies in training. At present, when you buy a yearling horse in training, you can have, if you tick the box, you can have it tested for anabolic steroids. There is a box on the form when you make a purchase, and this test can be done. It's not cheap, but it can be done on the blood test. And as far as we know, we haven't had any positives. So, as I say, this test can only reach back a maximum of 3 months. And we've got a lot to be proud about in thoroughbred breeding industry. If a horse is tested after a race, then they can use urine and blood. But what the BHA has said when they made this announcement, that they will have the possibility to take any sample from a horse, and they introduced this probability of hair testing. Now, many people know that if you can take a hair reflects a horse's life, and you can take hair and look at sections of it, see what it's been eating and particularly what it might have had medication-wise. And this is the area that's causing quite a lot of concern, because it will, we believe, be able to show a horse's medical life, and how accurate this will be in terms of when it had the drug, if it had it. It's not sure. There have been rumours that it will be accurate to within a week. We asked Jenny Hall at the AGM last week if this was true, and she said, I don't know about that, and it's certainly not what she's expecting, but it probably will be quite accurate. So if something should come up, they may well be able to say, well, it had the steroids in such and such a month, and then look back and see who was the owner or registered keeper at the time, and have an inquiry on that score. What the BHA have said is not envisaged that hair sampling will be deployed extensively in the immediate future. So they've made the rule, and it's going to be done by blood testing and investigation, and we cannot get an answer out of them as to when hair testing may come in. But it's going to come in, but they have to be very careful about having it robust and legally binding and accurate and all that sort of thing when it does. So it doesn't look like it's going to be this year. We have no idea whether it might be next year. It's coming, and we're going to have to get used to that. There are other issues outstanding from that, and one of our concerns is many mares will have regumate during pregnancy, and we don't know whether their foals will have residues in tail hairs when they become athletes themselves. It's not that likely, but it's something that the BHA would have to look at, because obviously we don't want foals born to mothers that may have had regumate for several months during pregnancy and have residues in their tail hairs which could be misconstrued at some later date with a tail hair test. So it's one of our concerns. The other one is, of course, while we're relying on blood tests, without the availability of hair tests, it's possible that a horse is completely negative on a blood test but may have had steroids in its past, and if you have bought such a horse and later proves to have been shown by a hair test that it's been treated as a foal or something like that, then that poses all sorts of legal arguments and not conditions of sale, but if it might have been a public auction and who was the owner at the time, and it might not have been born here, or all sorts of things. So there is a gap between the announcement of the policy and relying on blood tests only, and then in the future there's going to be hair testing, which is going to look historically at the horse's life and what it may or may not have been treated with. And between bringing in this rule, there is this gap, which has created some level of uncertainty, particularly with people not in this country who maybe want to sell foals or yearlings or even horses in training here and be subject to the new BHA rules. We like the aim of the BHA to create an industry that can be transparent. Racing is really global, and it'd be nice when there's a completely level playing field, which I think will come when hair testing is established and people get used to it. But it is a big shift for breeders. I'm not suggesting people have been using it extensively, because we know they haven't. In terms of responsibility, what they're signing up to, and what they may be buying at the sales. And there's a lot more discussion that's going to go on with this with regard to hair testing and that sort of thing when it comes in, and I'm sure there'll be questions about it which we can take later. The other issue that I want to bring to your attention, which has come up very much this year, is performance profiling. And as many of you know, there is quite a lot of take-up from various companies that offer all sorts of claims on what they can provide for you by looking at the genetic makeup of horses. Costs of analysing these genetic materials have really reduced, which is making them a bit more available. And from a single blood sample and a very small amount, thousands of tests of alleles can be analysed on a very small sample of blood. And all these companies are hoping to look for an edge of genetic profiling that will help in the selection or breeding of horses and make you more competitive on what you might breed or buy at the sales. There's a very big history of this in other animals. It's widely used in some of the farm animal things, and there's a huge number of tests available. They become relatively cheap. They're used widely for things like muscle marbling and weight gain and all that sort of thing. You know, for £10, you can get two what are called essential tests in cattle. And there's so many companies over in America that some of the American authorities have looked at a validation program, because some of them have enormous claims which is very difficult to validate and make sense of for people who think they might want to use one or more of them. One of the more prominent ones over here, Equinome, many of you will know, now advertising what they call superior accuracy over just looking at the pedigree alone. They started out by analysing this particular myostatin gene, so-called speed gene. This is not an elite gene, it's regard to speed against stamina. And every horse will have inherited a C or a T gene from each parent. Therefore, all horses will be one of those bottom line there. There'll be either CC, CT, or TT in their makeup in terms of sprinting longer distances and then a staying distance. They have recently increased their services to offer you a genomic racing value 1 to 4, a genomic breeding value of 1 to 4, prediction of height, and a prediction of inbreeding. The TBA board are going to meet Equinome to hear about some of their more recent claims and try to understand some of the how they're basing these claims, and because it's important for us to know as much detail as possible what they're offering and whether their claims are going to be accurate or not. This has come to prominence recently because one of these companies has been asking for retrospective access to some of that blood taken when you register your foal. And this has exercised Weatherby's and particularly their counterparts in Ireland, because who owns that blood? It's been taken for identification purposes, and it's been kept there in case there's a row about its identity. And it sits there, and it actually is the property of the breeder. And one particular company was asking to have retrospective access on behalf of a client or clients so they could analyse other people's horses by asking the breeder to request the blood sample or part of the blood sample. Since then, a lot of legal advice has been given to Weatherby's and their counterparts. And last week they came back to us saying, you can request access to that blood, but only if you are still the owner of it, i.e. haven't sold it. And that this hopefully will restrict what's been described as a land grab access to retrospective sampling, which everybody outside the performance profile industry says we should not allow because it may give a very competitive edge, or it may have very big deleterious effects on values of horses, and none of us really know where this may lead. There could be some good advantages to the industry in terms of selecting out some disease profiles or that sort of thing, but there could also be some quite big downsides, and that if we got to a scenario where people would have foals born, take a sample from them, have it analysed, and the report come back saying it'll never be any good, we could get ourselves to a situation a bit like the dairy industry, where bull calves have a very less certain future than heifer calves. And we don't want that. So there is a large amount of uncertainty where this may lead. We certainly can't stop it, but we want to understand it. And talking to
that horse, he had an anabolic steroid, you think? That one in that picture?
I thought you wanted to pick that out, actually. It looks like that.
Some really small people or one great big horse?
Well, when we were getting the slides ready, we thought we'd sort of combine one that might see who might pick up on that, actually. So I think he might have had steroids from pre-birth, I would think. So just sort of talking about that a little bit more, it's still relatively expensive. This Equinome, this test takes too long for you to use at the sales. You can't have a test the day before and have the results by the sale date. And there's the definition about who owns this particular bit of blood sample you've had taken a registration. In America, there's one particular company, Equinome Analysis, that does offer an overnight service at the sales. They base it on hair, so they have to get permission for hair sample to be taken, and then they use it to look at a number of different factors which they think might help in their yearling selection process. I had a long chat with Matthew Binns, who's part of that over there now and has been doing it for some years. I had a long chat with him last week. And he is very much of the opinion that it's perhaps part of the puzzle, has not yielded any great advance for them buying yearlings, and they put it in with all the other factors of looking at the yearling, seeing its pedigree, having it vetted, checking the x-rays, a raft of other things that helps them with their selection. So at present, they have not made a breakthrough which means they can narrow down their selection of yearlings purely on a genetic test and prove to have winners each time, or much closer to that than the general usage. So this is something that's very much on the horizon for the industry. It could have quite a lot of benefits. It could have some big downside too. It is to be hoped that speed and stamina and performance and all that sort of thing is a multi-complex thing and won't have an issue of a single gene or a single combination of genes or expression of genes, which will give some players far more advantage than others. So just in conclusion, this is something we're having a good look at, and we're going to try and understand better, and we won't be able to regulate it particularly, but we are going to move along with it and keep a very careful eye on this, and it's very much part of the future for the industry. Thank you very much.